Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, your number one stop for all things polling and election analysis in the United States. And today we're going to be looking at my election forecast for the 2024 presidential election and looking at my accurate 2020 model and what this means for 2024. Hit the like button and subscribe for more honest analysis for political elections just like this. Make sure to go ahead and comment down below to help us out with the algorithm. Follow me on X as well. Make sure to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on those post bell notifications so you don't miss another video just like this. And so, looking at my map here, you do see Donald Trump with a pretty excessive lead in the Electoral College. He is winning 329 Electoral College votes to Kamala Harris's 209 Electoral College votes. This does seem like a pretty lopsided victory for the former president in the Electoral College, and many casual viewers may say that I am a biased channel or that I'm trying to project my bias for the former president in this video. But I'm here to tell you that this scenario may actually be very possible, as this same model that I have constructed for this election would have predicted the exact same map that Joe Biden would have won with back in 2020 with 306 Electoral College votes to Donald Trump's 232 Electoral College votes. I also developed a scorecard for this model, which essentially compares my 2020 margin with the actual result and looks at my error margin for each individual state, with the largest error being in the state of Hawaii, which overestimated Joe Biden in the state by around 2.9 percentage points. So essentially, all of the errors in these states essentially end up being below a 3-point margin of error. And so looking at this is a good sign for Donald Trump, because I was able to basically create a system that was able to predict the 2020 election with essentially 100% accuracy. And this is something that I actually developed recently, and I'm applying the same methodology to the 2024 election, which currently gives me this map in the Electoral College. Now, there's about 3 parts to this. The first thing is I'm creating polling averages for the individual states, only for the battleground states. The other states, I kind of use my own intuition to kind of pick the margin. So there is a little bit of human intervention in this. However, for the major swing states, I am creating polling averages, which essentially reweigh all the polling data by party ID, which I've also done for the 2020 election, which my polling averages were also correct in all the states that I did them for. Now, the more polling averages, the more polls were in an average, the more accurate it actually was, by the way, which is pretty fascinating. But overall, I would have essentially gotten all the states correct in 2020 with this model, and it does not rely on any previous results, which tends to kind of mess up a lot of models, and kind of having these quote-unquote fundamentals are also a little bit confusing. But what it is I have my own polling averages. Then we have the demographic model, which can essentially be whatever you want it to be. And the way I do it is for the 2020 election, all of the demographic analysis from Atlas Intel's final poll in 2020, which was the most accurate national pollster back in 2020, which had a margin of about just Biden plus 4.7% in the popular vote, which I use this to essentially create the demographic model based out of all of the demographics that we get here. And once I'm able to get that model, I essentially go ahead and plug in all of the demographic data into the 538 model, and essentially creates these margins right here, which actually ended up giving me Joe Biden with 290 Electoral College votes. Georgia was the only one that was a Republican flip on that demographic map, but it would have given me the correct map, and the popular vote kind of lined up in the demographic model with the top line of the model, or at least of the poll. So that is fairly interesting. And looking at the 2020 margin, we see I basically track the nonpartisan voting pattern of every state from 1996 to 2016. And what this basically is pretty much looking at every single state and how they would vote if the popular vote was tied. And when you look at the average shift between those elections and you apply the trend to the 2016 nonpartisan voting patterns of all the states, you get estimated 2020 results. And what you do is you basically guess the popular vote as accurately as you can. And when you do that and you apply it here, you should get results that are fairly accurate to the actual election as a whole. And the way I was able to predict the popular vote for 2020 of getting actually a Biden plus 5.1 margin, by the way. So it's not even that. It's actually Biden plus 5.1, which really wouldn't have changed anything, as a very slight change. It would have made Georgia a tilt margin, so that would have been accurate. And North Carolina actually would have gotten a little bit redder. So this actually would have improved the model by a couple decimal points, but I digress. So essentially, looking at this, I created a polling average in 2020, which essentially weighs to the Atlas Intel electorate, right? And so what it does is essentially reweighs all of the polling data to the proper party ID, because you do have polls where certain parties are oversampled. And when you adjust and account for that, what's fairly fascinating is you get a Biden plus 5.1 percentage point popular vote victory. And when looking at just the accurate pollsters in 2020, which was Rasmussen, Emerson, Big Data Poll, and Atlas Intel, you get a Biden plus 5.4 lead, I believe that is. So again, wouldn't have really made that much of a difference. Maybe North Carolina would have gone blue, but probably not even. And looking at the 2024 accurate polling, Donald Trump currently leads that average by around 3.1%. Donald Trump is getting 49.2% of the national popular vote to Harris's 46%. And so that is not looking good either. And when you aggregate all of the polls, which are on my scorecard, when you aggregate all of those, as of now, Donald Trump is actually ahead by roughly, give or take, about 2.9% as of right now. So that is a very fascinating result there. And when you essentially apply that to the trend map over here, which now we can go to 2024, I have the Atlas Intel's latest demographic modeling, all of my polling averages plus my estimated guesses, and the 2024 margins over here based on the national popular vote margin, which is about plus 2.8. And we also have the nonpartisan voting pattern calculated from the trends from 2000 to 2020. And when that happens, we get the final margins that are shown here, which are also shown on my website at onpointpolitics.com, which have Donald Trump's odds of winning the election at about 85% to Kamala's 15%. And Donald Trump is just completely destroying her in the Electoral College. We can see in Wisconsin, Donald Trump is up there by about 7 points. In Pennsylvania, he's also up by around 7. North Carolina, he's also up by a similar amount, give or take, almost a similar amount as Pennsylvania. Georgia is around a similar amount. Arizona is slightly more Republican, maybe due to Hispanic voters kind of moving to the right. Florida is around an 11-point victory for Donald Trump. Texas is around a 15.5-point win for the former president. Minnesota, Maine at large, and New Hampshire all flipped to the former president, which is fairly interesting in this scenario because Donald Trump, in the reweighted aggregates, when you weigh all of these by proper party ID, they're actually pretty competitive. And we've gotten reports from the Harris campaign that they are a lot closer than what the public polling is actually making it seem. And pollsters are seemingly missing non-college educated voters and a lot of first-time voters that may break for Donald Trump in this election. We just did a collab with Rasmussen Reports, who actually ended up having pretty liberal overestimations of Joe Biden in 2020 in their state polling, unlike what the popular opinion about them is. And they've tried correcting for that, and they just released a bunch of state polls, and Donald Trump is up in, effectively up in a state like, for example, North Carolina. He's up in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Virginia's only a 3-point win for Kamala Harris, which is sort of similar to what I have here. I have about a 2-point win for her. Minnesota, I think he has it about 3, but you could make the case that Donald Trump does get underestimated there because he did try to weigh conservatively for the Democrats. So even trying to be fair to the Democrats, he can't even get her to be ahead in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, which is a really bad sign for Kamala Harris in both of those states. And so that is really not looking good for her whatsoever. And so that's how I was essentially able to create this accurate model, which pretty much got the 2020 election right. And looking at the new Alice Intel demographic data, that's also plugged into the same column where I plugged in the 2020 data. So next month, when we get their final poll, it is going to change a bit. Like you may see a little bit of a change in the model because the demographic modeling is going to be vastly different compared to what it was before. So that's definitely going to show up as well. I believe I opened the one for June by accident, but they did actually do one very recently. They did one in September, and that's the data that I have plugged in. I don't know why I opened the June one, but I do have the data for September plugged in. And it does give me a lead for Trump in Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Maine at large by very narrow margins. And he's actually ahead in my polling averages in Minnesota, in New Hampshire, and in Maine. He's actually ahead in all of them. He's even ahead in the Virginia one. Now, if I were to update the Virginia one, he probably won't be ahead anymore because there's been some liberal polling coming out of there. But in my polling averages, he's ahead in those. And all the states where I did polling averages for, I got the states correct when I did the polling averages for 2020 to back test this to make sure that I was doing the right thing. It gets pretty close, and I basically get every single state correct. So, I mean, it's within the ballpark of possibility that I am going to be the most accurate forecaster, and I end up getting states that nobody else would essentially get correct in my own forecast. And all I'm doing is going off of historically accurate modeling and data of the previous election. And the cool part about my model is it does not rely on any, biased confirmation bias type fundamentals or any previous election results that control the model. It's specifically designed for there to be any electorate that could possibly happen. Alice Intel basically does their polling. We plug in their demographic model. We weigh all the party ID data properly to what we think the electorate's going to be. We were able to get that right for the 2020 election by using Alice Intel's electorate as well. So you can see that there's actually a way to get this correct. Now, for example, if you wanted to use my model, and let's say you wanted to use CNN's demographic modeling, I mean, you could. You're going to be wrong, but you could. It's your option. But that's the cool part about this model is when used correctly, you can get an accurate result. I'm just using the maximum accurate result from the previous election to be able to use this. I mean, for example, let's say this year Rasmussen ends up being more accurate than Alice Intel. In 2028, Rasmussen will be the poll that I use for all of the electorate and demographic modeling, essentially. That's basically what's going to happen because they would have been the most accurate pollster in 2024. So the next one, they're the gold standard to use for all the demographic and electorate modeling. But Alice Intel was accurate in 2020 and has been accurate internationally in other countries within the margin of error as well, by the way. So that's also fascinating to think about as well. And looking at that scorecard, guys, I mean, the errors in some of the states are not really a lot. I mean, it's about like half a point, sometimes a point off in either direction. And you see, I miss in both directions. I actually miss more to the left. I actually overestimate Biden in some states by more than I even should be. So, again, I actually do lean more left in my model. And the average error from the model is actually about 0.4% Democrat bias. So even though I'm a quote unquote right wing political analyst, my model for 2020 still has a 0.4 percentage point Democrat bias. And so I just wanted to make this to show you guys that my accurate 2020 model is showing a Donald Trump victory of epic proportions. And if I were the Kamala Harris campaign, I would be very worried right now. And you see it in some of their behavior. I mean, they're hopping on random podcasts. She's trying to do more interviews after she was refused a debate from Donald Trump. And no one likes to admit this, but the reason why she wants the new debate is because she knows she's not ahead. I mean, it's just the truth. I mean, we see it here. All the accurate pollsters have the race tied or have Donald Trump ahead by a few points in the popular vote. And looking at Gallup, which tends to be a pretty accurate indicator of where the election's going to be, we see that all of their indicators for the election are favoring the Republican by a pretty high amount. Those include party identification and leaning, party better able to handle most important issue, U.S. satisfaction, economic confidence, party better able to keep America prosperous, presidential job approval, party favorable ratings, party better able to keep America safe from international threats, preference for government activity, congressional job approval. And when you look at the party breakdown, what's pretty fascinating is they've actually been relatively within the ballpark in the past 4 elections in the popular vote when looking at their leaning. Even here, their final popular vote margin, or at least the final margin, actually always tends to be to the right of what their final leaning thing is. For example, here they were kind of off here. Al Gore was up by 5, but again, you had third parties kind of eating into Al Gore's support. So that definitely could have actually been hurting Al Gore in that election. Same thing here in 2004. The electorate was roughly tied, and that's when Bush won the popular vote by 2 points, guys. And we see in 2008, Obama led by roughly 8, or at least the Democrat leaning was up by 8, and he won by 7.2% in the popular vote. 2012, D plus 4 here, and he won by 3.9%. In roughly, 2016, D plus 3, and Clinton won by 2.1, and then here D plus 5, and Biden won by 4.5, and now it's Republican plus 3. So again, and they only do this once, by the way. They only poll this one time, so this is the only time they're doing this. And so they were pretty spot on when they did it for those years. And looking at this now, in 2024, the Republicans have a net lead of 3 points, which is right around what my margin is with the accurate sample. With the accurate pollster, Trump's ahead by 3.1. With all the aggregates, he's up by 2.8. So essentially, the Gallup party identification is essentially the mean of those two aggregates that I have, and they've been historically accurate. And we see that Donald Trump is now favored to win everything pretty easily. And even look at this, 2024, Republicans ahead by 5 on the most important issues, economy and immigration. So we see that. And look, for example, Democrat was leading on the most important issue, COVID-19, and the Dem won the election. Over here, 2016, Republicans led Democrats on the economy and election, and the Republican won. Democrat won on the economy, Obama won. Obama won in 2008. Republicans were ahead on the most important issues, Iraq war and economy, and Bush won. And in 2000, they didn't have anything, which was weird. 1996, Democrats were ahead. Bill Clinton won. Same thing in 1992. In 1988, the Republicans were ahead in the most important issue here, and they ended up winning the election. Same thing in 1984. They were tied roughly here in 1980 with inflation, and then Republicans won. 1976, Democrats were ahead on inflation by 20 points, and they won that race very narrowly. 1972, Republicans were ahead. The Republican won. So it's like, guys, there's not even a better track record. There's no better track record than this. The only year that they got wrong was 1984, when they had Republicans ahead by 7 on the issue, international issues, and the Democrat won the presidency, because that was the first election where polling was a thing, was 1948, and it was historically known that Thomas Dewey was overestimated in the polling data. But besides that, they've basically been accurate in every single election when looking at the party on the most important issue. When you look at that, they've been accurate. Besides that first election, they've been accurate every single time after that. So that's a problem. That's a huge problem for Kamala Harris. If I were her, I'd be concerned. Economic confidence index is super low. Super low. Look at 2020. It was only -4, guys. It was -4. And it's at -28. It hasn't been as bad since 2008. And I mean, it's not as bad as 2008, but that's still a pretty bad economic confidence index. And look at 2000. This was the one exception where the Democrats were ahead on this and the Republicans just won. It was a really narrow race. So it was almost like it was such a close race in Florida that it basically, all of these kind of things cancel each other out because Florida was so ridiculously close. 1996, the Democrats were ahead on this issue, and we saw that Bill Clinton won re-election, and Democrats were also, or yes, or let's see, oh well, yeah, they had a positive economic approval, and then the economy in 1992, the economy had a 37 minus favorability confidence index, and the Republican was the incumbent, and then the Democrat won. So it's literally like also been accurate every single time. National satisfaction, whenever it's relatively high, usually the incumbent tends to win. Look at that, 2008, 13%, guys. Like, that's really bad. And it's at 22% right now. Like, it's just as bad as it was in 1992. And that's when George H.W. Bush was the incumbent, and the Democrat Bill Clinton ended up beating him pretty badly. So again, and Biden's approval ratings at 39%, and they just took that poll. Party favorability ratings, Republicans are actually narrowly ahead, which is fairly interesting, and they haven't been ahead since 2004. So again, another sign that something's going on. And 2020, you saw here doing too much, and then here 2020 it said should do more, right? And then after Biden got elected, immediately flipped back again. It immediately flipped back. Congressional job approval is in the 20s. Divided government performance, I mean, you see here, give or take, it's not going to really have an impact, but looking at all those indicators, it favors Donald Trump in this election heavily, and they've been historically accurate for a pretty long time, guys. So the fact that they even have the party ID for Republicans up by that much when they essentially have not had it up ever is a bad sign for Kamala Harris. And my prediction may possibly come true, and I may end up being the most accurate forecaster for 2024. So if you guys did enjoy this analysis, make sure to go ahead and hit the like button and to subscribe. If you want more content just like this, make sure to go ahead as well and comment down below. Follow me on X at onpointpolitics. Make sure to go ahead and to keep the bell notifications on so you don't miss another video just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.